Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, Election 2014, State House District 43 and State House District 48. Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now, your host for tonight's show. Tonight, our Election 2014 coverage continues with House races from West and Windward Oahu. During the first half, incumbent Representative Karen Awana is fighting off a challenge from Republican Andria Tupola, a music professor at Leeward Community College. These two candidates will discuss issues facing District 43, Ewa Villages to Nanakuli. Those issues include things like development, transportation, and the cost of living, and both will explain why they think they would best represent the district. The second half of tonight's show will move to Windward Oahu, where we'll be joined by two of the four candidates from District 48, Kaneohe to Haiku. Democrat Jarrett Keohokalole and Libertarian Kaimanu Takayama will discuss pressing issues in their district and how they propose to address them. We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Tonight, the seating arrangement and order of the questions was determined by random draw. Now to our candidates. Andria Tupola, the Republican candidate for District 43, teaches music full-time at Leeward Community College and is working on her PhD at the University of Hawaii. Andria also established Make a Joyful Noise, a nonprofit that donates musical instruments to students in the Pacific. Democratic Representative Karen Awana has been the incumbent for State House District 43 since 2006 when she was elected as a Republican. She has since switched political parties, becoming a Democrat in 2007. Representative Awana previously served as a House Majority Floor Leader and was recently appointed Vice Chairwoman of the National Caucus of Native American State Legislators. Let's start with you, Representative Awana. You are Native Hawaiian, so is your opponent. How is that issue playing out? Is that an issue at all, particularly the federal recognition in the Waianae district?
I know that the Department of Interior did come to the Nanakuli district, and there was a lot of heated discussion and dialogue regarding that issue. Since then, I haven't heard too much rumblings or any type of discussions about federal recognition since then.
As a Native Hawaiian representative, though, you feel that there's some special responsibility that you carry to represent your people?
Yes, most definitely. As you had just mentioned, that I just became the vice chair of the National Conference of State Legislators. It also includes, besides Native Americans, Native Hawaiians. And those types of relationships have helped me working with Native Americans to see a little insight as to what their recommendations might be, gaining some advice. And from that discussion, they had advised me that perhaps we are looking, instead of the Department of Interior, to perhaps have discussions with the Department of Justice, being that, you know, it was said to be an illegal overthrow.
Ms. Tupola,
Yes.
How do you feel about that particular issue? I mean, what do you think is the right direction for the Native Hawaiians to go?
I think regardless of the direction, I think everyone just wants information. I felt like that was the cause of all of the commotion and lots of heated debates, is because lack of information to the community on what was happening. And so I feel like maybe it could go one way or the other, but in this issue and many other issues, our constituents feel like they're uninformed. They feel like things come at them that they don't know about, that they don't know all the basis and the arguments for. And so I feel like that's what the constituents don't want. They don't want to be in the dark on issues. They want leadership to step up and explain to them maybe where they can voice their concerns, and then also what decisions are being made that are going to affect us.
On that point, I know Representative Awana is a homestead resident. Homesteads are significant, particularly Nanakuli and Maili. How do you feel about that as a program, and the other Native Hawaiian benefits? Do those need to be protected in your mind?
Are you talking about homestead benefits?
Homestead and other entitlements such as OHA and those sorts of things.
Oh, definitely. Most definitely. I think as Native Hawaiians, those are the things that we're looking for, is that the things that were promised to us in the government have been given, and that they're being measured so that they're allotted to the right quantity. I mean, as you know, there's a deficit in Hawaiian homes being built. There's a huge list of people. So we're hopeful, although it's not part of our stewardship under the state House representative to deal with OHA and DHHL issues, we're hopeful that they'll solve some of these problems so that Hawaiians can go forth and have homes that are affordable to live in Hawaii and have the benefits that the state promised.
Representative Awana, on that point, affordable housing is huge as an
Yes.
issue in your district. What do you think should be done there? I mean, is it the homestead issue or is it an overall issue of affordability?
Are we speaking about the homestead areas? or-
Either just generally about affordable housing. If you want to say something specific about homestead, go ahead. But
Oh, well, in the homestead, someone being a original lessee of the homestead, I can, firsthand share with you that it's a lengthy process and it's extremely laborious in order to get a homestead. I think many of the challenges come from the fact that because we have 50% blood quantum, as time has progressed, many of those who do have the 50% are older and may not have it may not be feasible for them. So that is a large challenge for many of the Native Hawaiians. They do have the blood quantum. Unfortunately, they don't have the finances or the jobs or positions that will be able to allow them to get that loan. So I think creative means, I know that they do have some self-help, so perhaps more of those initiatives, working with other organizations to see how we can leverage and get more Native Hawaiians on the homestead, as well as infrastructure that is needed in order for them to reside on those homesteads.
just to follow up, for the non 50% community, which you all also obviously represent, do you think affordable housing is very important to them? And what kind of things do you think need to happen to make housing affordable to all people?
I think most definitely the challenge that we have in our district is that, in the state of Hawaii, is that land is so expensive. And in addition, we only have a finite amount of property. I've been working closely and studying more into issues such as they have like a tiny community initiative or tiny homes where you're able to utilize the space efficiently. So having efficient homes in smaller areas, whereas you can use more space. You have the space upwards, but this way you would use less space, and it's more environmentally friendly. And all of those things that can help. The cost of the home wouldn't be as expensive as if you were to purchase a 6-digit home.
Let me offer that same question to Ms. Tupola. What do you think is the solution to getting more affordable housing?
Well, there's various things going on in our community. One of them is Halimakana. It's low-income housing that was established by Governor Lingle, and it's very affordable, and it's not the transitionary housing where after 2 years you have to move out. A second thing they're doing in Maili is self-help housing. I don't know if you've heard of it, but this is amazing because the families take out a loan for a minimal amount, and they actually don't even have to start paying the loan upon building their house. They pay it at the end of the project, and their rent for a house that's about 4 bedrooms is $1,200, but they sacrifice a year, maybe even more, building that home. But the concept to me is amazing because, one, they're building their own house that if they ever had problems, they could fix it themselves because now they've learned the skills. And two, they're building with a community that lives right around them, so they've already had that 1.5 year relationship. So when they're moving to their home, they know everyone on the block. I mean, really, that's what a community is meant. People who build their own houses and know each other.
As a Republican, traditionally Republicans have been a little bit more resistant to government trying to push the private sector into things like forcing them to build affordables and so on. But do you think that is necessary, though, to get more affordable rentals, for example, at the scale? I mean, those projects are nice, but I mean, the kind of scale that we need to really address the affordable housing issue, do you think it's okay to force developers to build it in return for the entitlements to build market homes?
I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer your question, but I can say that I don't think that anyone should be forced into building their own home. I know for that project, people gladly...
Building affordable homes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like people gladly put their name on the list knowing what was behind it and what the outcome would be. I do believe that the levels of problems for low-income housing are vast, because some of them are even at the federal level. I mean, even just with the Jones Act and the price of shipping that's here in Hawaii. I mean, these are things that are like multi-level problems, and all of those affect why we don't have affordable housing or the quantity of affordable housing.
Representative Awana, do you think this is a point of difference between the two of you? Do you believe, for example, The mayor just today, I think, started proposing affordable housing requirements on developers that would be more stringent by far than the state. HCDA has, I think, a 20% requirement.
Yes.
Do you think that we do need to demand more of developers when it comes to affordable housing?
I think we need a variety of different initiatives. I'm not too sure if to demand our developers, for example, in Kaka'ako. I know that they do have that requirement, and it's based on the fact that we should allow people of all different price ranges to be able to live in Kaka'ako, and not only to be reserved for the wealthy and those with a lot of money, to have maybe even a second or third home or just for investment. We need to allow for those who will be working and gainfully employed in that area as well, so that we can go ahead and overall look at a holistic approach to housing. And I know that the mayor had also looked into how we go ahead and rezone Ohana, the Ohana zoning. So I think, that those different levels and different approaches, but I think more discussion between developers, especially many of those who have already gone into the development with an agreed upon percentage or base amount of affordable housing.
Let me, one more question, I think, on affordable housing. The right kind of alongside your folks' district is going to be the Ho'opili development, which is plugged in there right between above Ewa Villages and between the highway there. And there's transit-oriented development there. What kind of opportunities do you see? First of all, do you agree that Ho'opili should be there and develop the way it is, because that's heading into City Council? And also, what opportunities do you say, if it is developed, for communities, such as yours?
I think three things. First off, I don't know if we have any say on what developers do. I mean, we can work with them, but we can't say you can't build here if they buy property, correct? The second thing is developers that are responsible develop upon need. So if there's a population that's very large, they'll develop more homes based on need, right? And the third thing is, as they consider developing these, they also have to think about, one, traffic into town, and two, conveniences around it. And that's kind of how Kapolei was built. I mean, I sit down with developers that have done Kapolei Commons, and that's their mindset. Upon the need, we built this shopping center, and now it's providing jobs for people who live there because now there's so many homes. So I think staying within that responsible development paradigm, I think that we should be good.
Do you think that's how it's been working out in the Kapolei area?
No.
Okay, well,
it's gone both ways, and I don't want to throw names out there, but there are some people that are pushing the issue as far as development, and I don't think they're ready for it. I mean, obviously you see with the traffic that's coming out of there, are we ready for more development, or is there a need for more development? I mean, those are the kind of things that need to be asked, but people kind of group developers as all one person. They're not. There are some responsible developers, and there are some that are just out to get the most bids and contracts and, suffice the people who they're buying the lease from. And so I think as a representative, that's what your job is kind of like mediate with these developers and kind of, I guess, network with them to the point where you can give them that kind of feedback from your constituents. We don't want more traffic, or please alleviate these issues before we build more development.
Representative Awana, I mean, the sense I'm getting is maybe there's a sense in the community that this is all going too fast, that the infrastructure hasn't kept up. That's why the traffic is so bad. I think that's a little bit of what Ms. Tupola is saying. Do you feel that way, that the development is happening too fast?
Are we talking about Ho'opili or district-wise?
And the whole, well, your district is basically surrounds Ho'opili, and your constituents are going to be affected by it pretty directly. So that was why I'm asking that question.
Okay, I think the infrastructure issues is based on the population increase. So our population has increased, hence we need more houses, hence we need more infrastructure. So in that area of transportation, I've had a short-range plan while I was a member on the neighborhood board to have the lights along Farrington Highway synchronized, because that was one of the challenges of traffic heading all the way into Waianae, being as far back as Makakilo. Short range, we have a road widening project along the bottleneck, which is between Nanakuli and Haleakala Avenues, and they're finalizing the contractor for that project. It's due to commence by the end of this year or early beginning of next year. And as a long-range project, we've placed on the list of larger projects with the Oahu Metropolitan Planning Organization and alternate access route out of the Waianae Coast. So it's, it takes a large overview, and then you're looking at little pockets as to how to address congestion in the Waianae Coast.
Yeah, we just got a question from someone named Rio via email right on that point, and you answered about half of the question. He says, you've been in office for almost 10 years, and the traffic situation getting to Waianae side is terrible. What have you proposed or suggested in those 10 years? And I think you answered that question to a certain extent, but I didn't hear you answer the question about the speed of development. Do you think that the infrastructure is coming in fast enough, or are there ways to accelerate it, or should growth actually be slowed down for some of these big developments?
I think we're on track because the population again is growing. The infrastructure needs to keep up, but you need the funds in order to obtain the necessary planning, design, and construction monies. So unfortunately, perhaps to the general public, they may not realize that it's actually a lengthy process. It doesn't happen overnight. You need to go into the legislature, get the funds for planning, then you go ahead, you get the monies for design. And you were talking about 70-something other legislators who are trying to get their pocket of money too. So when we're able to accomplish these tasks as time goes on, then we're looking at the long range and what comes out of it. And I realized to, someone who may not know what's going on in the background area to see what comes to fruition later on.
Ms. Tupola, as a newcomer and as a Republican, are you ready for the kind of elbowing and fighting for the kind of money that your district needs? That's going to be kind of a challenge, don't you think?
Yeah, people have said that to me, as a Republican, you're not going to get funding. How are you going to do it? I do believe that on the West Coast, we actually have a lot of solutions that lie within our community. I mean, we have a lot of nonprofits, we have a lot of grants. We have a lot of ways to alleviate problems without necessarily having to bid for money or get it through the budget. I mean, not all the problems, but many of the problems can be alleviated by better networking. And on top of it, I feel like throwing more money at problems sometimes doesn't help. And I want to say that there could be other solutions that maybe would require less of that, but maybe they haven't been looked at.
Let me ask another question. We'll go off. I always like to follow our viewers' questions as much as I can, even though it might knock me off my pattern a little bit. This one came Vandella via email, specifically to Ms. Tupola. Do you support the DOE's Pono Choices program?
No.
Why not?
Well, the Pono Choices and Alulike, they came to present to the neighborhood board a few months back, and there was a lot of controversy with this curriculum, and it was taken off the plate, and they emailed out to the state and said, if anyone wants to help redesign this curriculum, if you're a parent or if you're a teacher in DOE, we're looking for a committee to redesign it because of all the controversy. Well, when they came to present to neighborhood board, my big question was, okay, so since the controversy, what have you changed in the curriculum, and where is the curriculum in its entirety for us to view? Well, they didn't have any answers. They said, we're not sure. I think we're coming out with it. I'm not sure if we're going to have a link for the parents. And what we really need is some transparency, especially because it was so controversial. And a lot of people in the neighborhood board had concerns with them calling things culturally appropriate when a lot of it is not rooted in Hawaiian culture.
Are you against sex education in general terms?
Oh, no, not at all. But again, when you're dealing with something that really is, personal for a family and their children, you should definitely have the families, the parents be comfortable with what's going on. And without that transparency, how are we to know,
Representative Awana, you've been watching this controversy quite a bit. Yes. What's your feeling about how it was handled and what we ended up with? Because I think they did announce some changes to it finally.
What I had found out by attending meetings, I believe a gentleman by the name of Phil Lees actually came from Canada because of his knowledge on this program, and it's not actually a curriculum, but it's actually they're looking into, it's almost like a test project. So it's not an actual curriculum when we're talking about Pono Choices. Also, there were changes that were made to the curriculum that I've requested a copy, but I've yet to see it. But what also concerns me is that there is a possibility of that program to be taught at 2 charter schools, at Kamaili Academy and also at Kawaihona. The challenge with that Pono choice is that many parents are not aware of what's actually being taught with that curriculum. And I think part of it is that parents need to be more engaged and more knowledgeable of what's going on in their classroom.
You know, it just made me think, are both of you, either of you parents?
We're both.
Both
Yes.
parents? Okay. And how old are your children?
They're 5 and 7.
5 and 7, and yours?
21 and 19.
Okay, slightly different. But
Yes.
So, you know, I understand that one of the big changes that they did announce on the Pono choices was the families opt in instead of opting out. That is, a parent it'd be asked, do you want your child in this program or not, as opposed to you could let your children out. Do you think that that will make a big difference? Or does that increase your comfort that basically parents will be asked, do you want your child in this program?
No. I still think that we need to look at the curriculum. So whether or not it's an opt-in or an opt-out, if it's something that's being implemented in our public schools, everybody should be able to look at it. It's no secret what we teach our children.
Okay, now in a lot of districts, the same-sex marriage issue attracted candidates, and now I know both of you actually are against same-sex marriage. You voted against it, and you campaigned against it. But now that it's been, even the governors running who opposed it say it's resolved, do you feel it's resolved, or do you think it's something that is going to be, there's going to be more talk about it, more argument about it in the legislature?
What we're lacking is the religious protection portions of what happened. So will they be talking about it and changing it? I doubt it, because it's law now, but I do believe that there was a lot of loopholes in there that we were fighting for with the different amendments and that people testifying for, and those are the things that people want fixed this upcoming legislative session.
Do you think there will be arguments?
I think there's things happening right now, unintended consequences that have come from that. There's that transgendered individual who wants to be able to use a women's restroom. You know, it's things like that that actually come out of the same-sex marriage law, that, you know, things that people may not have taken into consideration, that I think we'll see more situations like that.
So would you actually propose legislation to make it specify which gender, or how you could determine who uses what restroom?
I think that's an opportunity for dialogue with those for and against same-sex marriage, to see how we can go ahead and find a solution to these types of issues.
There was another very interesting question that came out with Takayama saying he does marriages. That's what he does, not for a living, but he does it for money. So he told Hawaii News Now that if a same-sex couple came to him and wanted to get married, he would have to marry them because he's a private business person, and under the law, he has to treat everyone the same. Is that the kind of thing you also would consider to be sort of out of bounds of what people really find acceptable?
Yes, definitely.
And yourself?
Same.
Same. So you folks would actually propose or support legislation that would direct the government how to handle those kinds of issues?
Yes.
Okay. A question to both of you, but I'll start with Representative Awana first. Back to the Health Connector.
Okay.
Oh boy. What are we going to do about that? What do you think should be done about the Health Connector?
You know, originally I believe that Hawaii, because we were the forerunners in universal health care in our state, I think we were doing an excellent job. And now that the additional challenges and the federal mandates are coming through the Health Connector, I can see that there are a lot of challenges that still exist. They need to go ahead and resolve those issues. But as time goes on, hopefully we can work with our federal delegation to see if there can be some resolved where Hawaii may be exempt from many of those requirements.
And yourself?
Same, you know, the Health Connector, unfortunately we had such a great system going on. I mean, really here in Hawaii, we had very little problems as far as healthcare and the connection between our medical providers and the clients, but now the Health Connector has kind of complicated things. But again, inflexible federal mandates is what we're up against. So if we do fight certain things, will we be in violation of this mandate? So complications.
Yes, Representative Awana, you were the head of the Human Services Committee for a while, weren't you?
Oh no, that's
no.
Maili.
Oh, Maili. Okay, Maili Carroll. Sorry about that.
That's
But
all right.
on that question, though, how do you folks feel that we should cover the uninsured then? What's the best way to make sure? Because we still had about 10% uninsured.
I know that Human Services, they did have a program to look and see, to find those gaps. And if we had the opportunity, a little bit more opportunity, perhaps we can look closer at that 10% and close that gap as well.
How do you feel about covering the uninsured? Do you think that's something the government should do, or is that something they should figure out from?
Oh, that's such a complicated question. Let's talk about prevention.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay, what do you mean?
I mean, we can always go and try to solve that little complex problem of the health connector and health insurance, but really at our level, for our race, is that what we're, what we have power over? No. So what we can do for our communities is talk about the comprehensive health center. We can talk about preventative measures. We can talk about healthy living in the communities and activities that would encourage healthy eating, a bike path, things like that. That's within our realm of ability.
Okay, and another question now I asked Ms. Tupola about being a newcomer, being a Republican, and going in the legislature. And you've been in the legislature, and you've had a couple little bumps here and there. And we did get a couple calls specifically about the campaign spending issue. Also, people saying you raised taxes, changed parties. How do you respond to? Do you get a lot of negativity when you're out there? Are people asking you about these things?
Interestingly enough, not at all. And when I did change parties, there were calls in support. Thank you for changing. I even had calls from congressional supporting that effort.
Because you changed to be a Democrat, and there's all these Democrats, right?
But even people in the community as well, and those who were Republicans and Republicans at the Capitol even approached me with support and an understanding of how things work at our legislature. People who were Republicans in the community said they understood why I did what I did in changing from Republican to Democrat.
Now, has this been an issue for you? Is that something you bring up with folks, that Representative Awana has had some problems with campaign spending issues and those sorts of things?
No, people bring it to my attention.
They do talk to you about it?
Yeah.
And how do you feel about how important an issue do you think that is?
Well, for some people it's important. For some people it's really important to have a leader that's fiscally responsible, that can balance their own finances, so that they can model that they'll do that for the state. For some people it's important that people communicate and be who they are all the time, so that they can expect the same, the same outcomes. So for some people this has been an issue, and they've brought it to my attention.
And how can they know that you'll do better?
Well, I think with people's track record, you never know, and things get hard in life, but I can say that I have been a consistent person of who I am and what I believe in. I haven't changed my beliefs or my belief system in any recent 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 years.
I have a few more seconds to let you a chance to respond. So do you feel that people should distrust your ability to handle money, given that?
Most definitely. As a matter of fact, those who are close to my inner circle, they truly understand the situation that led to that. We've paid, everything is all in order, and if you look at the records, we've been consistent and keeping on track and moving in the right direction, and we just want to go ahead and move forward with that.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, Representative Awana, Ms. Tupola. Good luck. And the election is the 4th of November, and it's going to be pretty exciting, I expect. Right now, we're going to have, moving on to a discussion with the 2 of the 4 candidates vying for the open seat in House District 48. Now, we have a short message about an upcoming PBS documentary by filmmaker Ken Burns.
This fall, from director Ken Burns.
You can't expect people like that to happen all the time.
The monumental saga of an exceptional American family whose impact is still felt across the nation.
It's an extraordinary story. The drama of it is unmatched in our history.
Theodore, the once sickly boy who stormed into Washington as if he was charging into battle.
He didn't dare slow down. There were demons.
Franklin, struck down by illness, he would pull himself back up while lifting the country out of depression and war.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
You just had a sense this guy can do it.
Eleanor, she would go where her husband could not, redefining the role of First Lady and inspiring millions.
Eleanor Roosevelt is a sort of miracle of the human spirit. There are so many times in her life when you would think she would have given up.
and for the first time, peer into the private lives of the most public of people.
I can't even imagine what it must have been like for Eleanor to absorb a terrible betrayal.
Theodore, Eleanor, Franklin, the Roosevelts, an intimate history.
Starting Sunday on PBS Hawaii.
The Roosevelts, An Intimate History, a documentary series by Ken Burns, starts this Sunday on PBS Hawaii and runs through next Saturday. Welcome back to Insights on PBS Hawaii. House District 48 is a diverse area that includes retail-heavy Kaneohe and its suburban outskirts, as well as lush Haiku Valley and the mostly rural communities of Heeia and Kahaluu. Finding the right balance between development and agriculture and maintaining a rural character is a big issue for many, especially as you move closer to the North Shore, the country. Winner of the four-way general election will succeed former incumbent Jessica Wooley, who vacated the seat when she was appointed to head the Office of Environmental Quality Control. Now to our guests. Jarrett, I'm going to blow this several times, but I'm going to get it right. Keohokalole. Is that close enough?
Keohokalole.
Keohokalole is a legal fellow for the Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species and an assistant faculty specialist both at the William S. Richardson School of Law. And Libertarian Kaimanu Takayama is a self-employed working in alternative medicine and energy therapy. He's not accepting donations or spending money on his campaign as part of his belief in getting money out of politics. Republican candidate Eldean Kukahiko, a retired police officer and New Hope pastor, initially agreed to be on this show last month, but pulled out on Monday with his campaign telling us that going door to door for him was more effective than a television appearance. Nonpartisan candidate Kana Naipo could not appear on the show tonight due to a prior engagement. Boy, that was a mouthful. So, Mr. Keohokalole, we'll start with you. How big is the issue of development in your community? Especially, we see signs popping up along the highway about the big development, the Envision Laie development. How big is that for your constituents?
I think development is a big concern in our community. I talked to a lot of folks who are not interested in seeing any more development in our community specifically. There is there's the issue of the planned development, down the coast, which is outside of our district, but it is going to impact us in specific ways, one of which being traffic. Our district is sort of the hub of that side of the island. Much of the traffic goes through, almost all of the traffic goes through our community. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of what I think people in our community are aware of is the need for affordable housing and also the push for smart development and maximizing growth and directing growth to the west side of the island. People are split on I think people in our communities were split on the rail, but now that it appears as if it's going to go through, it's time to maximize that infrastructure and focus building on the west side to take advantage of those projects.
Mr. Takayama, do you feel the same way about that? Are you hearing the same kind of things about development in the area?
Well, we have to remember, we live on an island. We're limited on space. So when people say, we have to stop development, obviously that argument doesn't work very well because we need homes, we need agriculture. We have anywhere from 10 to 14 days worth of usable food on the island should an emergency happen. So we need to support agriculture. Both on the east side and the west sides of the island. We need to support affordable housing for everybody, but it has to be done in a way that's not just sustainable, but healthy for the communities. As he explained, traffic is the major issue coming through Kaneohe. You go from a 4-lane on Kahikili to a 2-lane. And that bottleneck is one of the major traffic congestion areas for the windward side. And there's space to extend the lanes and make the lanes wider going out towards Kahaluu, but then you have to measure, eventually we develop on that, and then it becomes a bottleneck again. You push further and further out. So we've got to really weigh, how much can we develop and what is the community willing to accept? And I don't think there's a consensus at this point as to what direction to go.
Mr. Keohokalole, do you feel like there is points of difference among the various candidates? You've got 4 candidates, and clearly the 2 Democrat, Republican are usually the favorites. No offense, but between you and your Republican opponent, are there big differences on the development issue that you've seen?
I'm not sure, I don't want to speak for my opponent, particularly because he's not here. I do think the main differences between me and my other opponents is that I'm a Democrat. I believe I believe that government can be a tool for making society a better place, for all of our residents. I believe in helping the poor. I believe in protecting our environment. I believe that climate change is real and that we are going to have to deal with rising sea level in our near future. I believe in equal rights, in women's rights. A lot of these principles that were brought to the mainstream in Hawaii as a result of the Democratic Revolution and as a result of the work of previous Democratic leaders like the late Congresswoman Patsy Mink and our late senior Senator Daniel Inouye. And so, we have differences of opinion on specific issues, but I think, the fact that I am a Democrat means something in this race.
It's very interesting to bring it up. So what does it mean to be a libertarian? I've heard jokes like, oh, that means you can eat anything you want. But in Hawaii's context.
Well, one of the primary things of the party is what we call the non-aggression principle, which means that you cannot force another person to do anything against their will. They own themselves, so they are responsible for themselves. Now, in terms of government, when you look at things, say, like taxes or government regulations, especially within business, we do not believe that the purpose of government is to enforce these and push these things on people. Everything that's done forcefully right now through government, let's say the income tax, everything that's done forcefully by government right now can be done in a non-aggressive or in a voluntary way. For example, changing our tax code from a compulsory to voluntary, which would be either a fair tax or what's called a consumption tax. Or take, for instance, the issue of same-sex marriage. The issue of same-sex marriage, everybody says it's a right. It's not so much that it's a right. Marriage itself is simply a ceremony. But when you look at the government providing benefits, privileges, and tax breaks to married couples, then you get into the realm of, well, if this group gets it, then it's discriminatory not to provide it to this group. We would prefer that the government stay out of the issue, not have to provide licenses, not to provide any benefits, allow people the free will to choose whether or not they want to participate or support such unions. And that includes businesses, whether it be a priest or a baker. I mean, they should have the free will to choose if that's something that they agree in.
What kind of things are your constituents bringing to your attention as you're walking around? What are the big issues in your district?
Well, cost of living is a big one. I talk to a lot of folks in our community who are concerned about their children and their children's children continuing to be able to afford to live in our community and in Hawaii. My family is a longtime family from the community. My wife and I moved back from the mainland to raise our kids here around our family, and I'd like them to be able to raise their kids here as well. And there are a lot of different aspects to that problem, but it is a major issue. I think homelessness is also another issue that's a particular concern in our community. A lot of it, specifically in our community, I think a lot of it has to do with the drug problem and the fact that a lot of the programs that service folks with mental health, with mental disabilities, and also with fighting drug addiction were cut during the Lingala administration. We're dealing with those repercussions now.
How do you feel about the homeless issue that you just brought up? We actually got a caller or an email, Michelle. What do you see as the solution to the homeless issue in Hawaii and particularly in our district? Why don't you go first?
Well, first, when it comes to any issue, especially with the cost of living, Hawaii has the highest taxes in the nation. We have the highest debt per capita. It's around $33,000 per person. Anything that has to do with a fiscal issue, we have to look at what the root cause of...
I'm sorry, when you say get, what is that? General excise tax?
I'm sorry.
You said something $33,000.
Okay, no, that's it's debt per capita. The state
debt per capita.
Debt per capita. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Sorry.
So the state debt per capita is about $33,000 per person, which is the highest in the nation. When we look at any fiscal issue, we have to take a look at monetary policy, and although we are a state and we are running for state office, we have to take into consideration the fiscal policy of the federal government. The Federal Reserve, which has been in activity now for 100 years, the value of our dollar has gone down 95% during that period. The hidden inflation from the loss of the value of our dollar is one of the primary reasons for the cost of living and the cost of food to go higher. So we need to, as a state, really take a look at what's affecting what our dollar buys.
You're running for the House of Representatives in the state of Hawaii.
I am, but and if I were to get into office, though, one of the primary things I would do is have hopefully be able to reach across the aisle to Democrats, Republicans, whoever else is in the office, and take a look at the fiscal policies of the federal government and how they're affecting the cost of living.
Yeah, but how does that generate homeless, mentally ill people in your district, and what do you do about them?
Because the reason why a lot of the people are homeless, or the cost of living is so high, is because people can't afford it. I mean, we have a house next door to ours, was built in the 50s, and it sold for over $600,000. Just the value of the land alone without the house, the average person is not going to be able to afford that.
Okay, let me switch. What do you think is the homeless solution? Now, you mentioned the programs were cut, so do you think that's what it is, to get those programs back up for the mentally ill and the folks with other disabilities, alcohol abuse and drug abuse?
Well, like many of the other major issues, they're difficult to solve, which is why we haven't solved them yet.
Yeah.
Right. So there are a lot of different aspects to the homeless issue. I think that particularly when it comes to our community, as opposed to the homeless issue on the previous district and earlier in the show, and also downtown, is the access to mental health and drug treatment for the folks in our community. When I grew up, we did not have folks living under the bridge doing drugs, and I think a lot of that has become so recognizable in our community because of the lack of services and the cuts that took place to the department. As an example, the Department of Health lost over 300 positions during the Lingala administration. And when I talk to folks who work in our district at the state hospital, who do mental health servicing and drug treatment, work at drug treatment programs, a lot of those problems are starting to percolate now because of the loss of those services.
But let me, based a little bit on what Mr. Takayama is saying, though, I mean, how do we afford it? How does the state afford it? How do you get the money to restore that many positions or to generate that many programs?
Well, I think, respectfully, I think the way forward on that at the State House of Representatives level is to work on stimulating the economy. Federal monetary policy is a federal issue. I dispute the figures that Hawaii has the highest tax rate in the nation. I think when you look at the effective tax rate, we're much lower than some other states. But we do need to look at tax policy. We can look at it at the state level in terms of using tax credits to stimulate the economy. One example that people bring up a lot is the solar industry and how that was, we were able to use that to stimulate the economy as opposed to having a state program just install solar panels. We provided a tax credit. We had businesses go out and start installing these units on residents, paying wages. Those folks that were earning those wages went out and spent money in the community, bought groceries and gas, and there's a multiplier effect. And at the same time, we were able to move renewable energy forward and play our part in living more sustainably. So I think there are opportunities, through government, through monetary and tax policy in the state to move forward on.
That's a very interesting point, given the Libertarian point of view, which tends to be against these kind of government incentives and so on. You'd rather just see things move naturally, right?
Well, government should be extremely limited. The free market can do what the government does, and it can do it cheaper and more effectively. So rather than going back to homelessness, rather than the government taking money from taxpayers and deciding how that money is spent, what agencies that should go to, the government should reduce the tax burden on the taxpayers and allow the individual people to make a decision. Well, if homelessness is such an issue on the Windward side and the people are concerned about it, they can donate their money to nonprofits, they can donate their money to social service agencies, but it's a free will choice. There's no coercion, there's no force in it. It's not the government forcing you to pay taxes and then distributing that money how the government feels appropriate. be much more effective if the people on the windward side say, oh, hey, look, there's an agency here that we really like. They're dealing with the homelessness problem. They're dealing with mental illness. They're dealing with substance abuse. I like what they're doing. I think they're effective. I will donate my money to them. But there also comes with that, they need to do their due diligence. They really need to do the background work on the agency, make sure that it's an agency they trust, that they're doing the work that they intend to do, the money is being used appropriately. This is where personal responsibility comes in, rather than just abrogating that responsibility to the government.
Okay. Let me go to you now one more time. You have a look on your face like, oh gosh. But let me change the subject completely. Gun control, this is based on a caller from Kahaluu. Do you have any plan or initiative to relax gun control laws in Hawaii?
No, I don't think so. I mean, do
people ask you about things like that when you were out and about?
People do ask me all the time. I think we have a lot of hunters in our community.
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
And I think that hunting is number one, it's a lifestyle. There's a cultural component to it as well. But I don't see the need at this point to move on any particular gun legislation.
Do you feel like Hawaii in particular does have a pretty stringent gun control scheme? And it sounds like that's okay with you.
Yes, I do. I do think, and I think if you talk to folks on both sides of that issue, they're going to say the same as well.
What do you think, gun control?
I'm a Second Amendment supporter. I mean, as a libertarian, I believe that people should have the right to possess and own firearms. I think that Hawaii's laws are a little on the strict side. I don't think that we should register. We should have to register. The police department's policies are a little invasive when it comes to gun ownership. But I do think that background checks are important. I believe that people should have the freedom to, go out and purchase a firearm, but it should, they shouldn't have to wait 2 weeks to clear a federal background check, or it should be a little bit easier. But I think that there should be some regulations in there. There's got to be a balance.
One interesting topic that I'm sure is important to folks in your district is agriculture and the access to locally grown food and so on. Do you feel like enough has been done to promote local grown, and particularly in your guys' district, there's experiments and efforts to try and help farmers. Do you think it's enough? Do you think there's more that can be done?
I think that's a really challenging issue, and the answer is I'm not quite sure. At the end of the day, when it comes to agriculture, this is an economic issue. It is very difficult for farmers who grow local food, albeit produce or livestock or dairy, to compete with imported food. And the only way we're going to move forward on agricultural issues is to work on the economic side of things. And that's a very difficult problem to tackle, whether to look into subsidies or working with the federal delegation to make sure that there's easier access for growers to keep compliant with the federal regulations that growers need to go through to sell their food to consumers. I think there are a lot of different aspects to that issue. And there's no one easy fix to it.
Mr. Takayama, you have an opinion about that?
I go to the farmers market at Windward Mall almost every week, and asking around through all the different vendors, one of the things that really bothered me was that there was only one, maybe two, out of the entire group of vendors there that actually grew their own vegetables. The majority of the vendors, they were buying and reselling. And most of that produce was from Asia, China, from South America, Mexico. So we definitely need to start supporting more local agriculture. And I think that, again, as Mr. Keohokalole said,
Mr. K.
we need to, it's an economic issue, and again, it all boils down to what's our tax code like? Is our government impeding economic growth through our tax policies?
Well, let me ask it this way, though. I mean, under a truly libertarian scheme, would agriculture that is not cost effective when it comes to a foreign import, could they possibly survive?
Well, then, okay. One of the things that we have the power to do is to impose tariffs. I mean, tariffs are not used that often on imported goods.
Especially from the U.S. mainland, I don't think you could do it.
Well, again, that's where the Jones Act comes in. So, I mean, if we eliminate the Jones Act, which Forbes magazine says results in as much as a 40% higher cost of living for the people in the state of Hawaii. If we eliminate the Jones Act and allow more shipping options directly from other places, increasing the competition drives down prices in most cases. So I think that we need to really look at where we're getting our fruit from and whether or not, again, it's a multifaceted issue. It's not an easy thing to say like, okay, well, the government's going to just provide subsidies and we'll help farmers grow products. It's got to be something where, the farmers here need to be sustainable with the products or with the produce that they're making without government intervention or without government assistance.
Do you think that, I'm going to change the subject again back to the subject you brought up when you mentioned the solar, that was sort of a free enterprise thing. In fact, it was going so fast, HECO got kind of left in the dust by it. Do you feel like our utility scheme and our approach toward, and particularly HECO's approach towards alternate energy is working, or do you think that that really needs to be addressed?
Well, I think there's been a lot of attention put on it. Particularly because the tax credits worked so well and it stimulated this new industry. I understand the fixation with the free market, but there are limitations to it. And one of the limitations to free market capitalism is the fact that you can have monopolies take over an industry and dictate the terms of the market in that industry. And HECO is a good example of that. That's why we have the PUC, and that's why we need to continue to focus on shining the light on HECO's operations to make sure that they are moving toward, or to make sure that they're flexible enough to receive whatever the next wave of technology when it comes to renewable energy is, because we do know that we have so much research and development going on right in Hawaii right now in terms of solar energy storage, in terms of smart grid technology, even ocean currents, and then when it comes to vehicles, electric vehicle, and even fuel cells. We need to make sure that our grid, which hasn't been upgraded in decades, is going to be flexible enough to receive those technologies when they do hit and they become ready and the market takes over and everybody wants a unit. We need to make sure that HECO is able to receive that technology and implement it into our system.
Mr. Takayama, do you think that, I've heard a number of libertarians basically call for the breakup of HECO into a private enterprise as opposed to a quasi-public organization. How do you feel about that?
The problem is that HECO is our only option right now. I would like to see the availability of a second option, maybe someone else, another organization or a business or a corporation coming in and offering the service so that there's a little more competition. Even if we make HECO a private entity, they've still got a monopoly on the market. That's the main issue. The problem with most of the alternative energies that we have right now, whether it be solar electric, wind electric, geothermal, or even water hydrothermal, is storage. When you purchase a system, you're still tied into the grid. In off times, the sun's not shining 24 hours a day, so you're still reliant on the utility. Ultimately, what we'd like to do is get to a point where people are self-sufficient. That would mean either producing energy 24 hours a day or figuring out ways to store the energy. And unfortunately, those technologies have not quite kept up with where we are. And we've reached that point where we've got a bottleneck now, and HECO is having to limit how many people come onto the grid. So it's, the problem with that is that everybody's paying for the tax credits. If you're a taxpayer within the state, you're paying for the tax credits of people who have received the solar systems. Mm-hmm. So now other people who want the systems are being told, no, they can't because the system's overloaded.
I'm going to change subjects again because I want to be responsive to our callers. Pat from Manoa, what is your opinion on GMOs? It must be an issue in your district. People, you've got a lot of farmers, pesticide use and so on.
Yeah, we do have a lot of farmers in the district that I've spoken to, and then we have a lot of folks who are active in that movement. I think when it comes to GMO, there are two. I think we need to separate the two specific issues. One is food safety, and the other one is agricultural practices. I think when you look at what has happened with the cases recently, well, with the Kauai case, is that we need to make sure that we remember that these are two separate issues. When it comes to food safety, I do support the people's right to know. I think the labeling issue is a very complicated one. And ultimately, you know, when you go in and you buy food from Safeway or from the grocery stores, even the farmer's market, ultimately it's the federal government that approves that product as safe to consume. The FDA is the one that ultimately is the arbiter of food safety. So I think we need to be careful in light of the Kauai cases on getting too actively involved in food safety. There are federal administrative processes that we can utilize. And you know, it's not as complicated as people think. In my other hat doing invasive species work, we engage the USDA and the FDA and the EPA. And they do have open processes that you can engage. Now, the one area we can take advantage of at the state level is agricultural practices.
I'm going to have to stop you before you move on to the second part. I think I understand what you're getting at, but Ms. Takayama, any thoughts on that issue, the GMO issue?
I am not a supporter of GMOs. There have been no serious long-term studies that have shown be completely safe for human consumption. That being said, though,
We've been consuming them.
Well, the papayas maybe, but I mean, when it comes to, 90% of the corn, 90% of the soy, 90% of the canola produced in the United States is GMO, but there have been no long-term independent studies on human efficacy. So I'm not opposed to GMOs. I mean, if they can prove that the benefits are there, I'm more than welcome, to be introduced. My concern is the labeling. I mean, we have the corporations and the Grocery Manufacturers Association are all opposing labeling because they say that it'll increase costs.
I have to actually stop us now because we are done with our program. Thank you both very much. It's been a great pleasure. In 2 weeks on Insights, Governor Neil Abercrombie's defeat in the primary election left the governor's office wide open. Republican Duke Iona, Libertarian Jeff Davis, Independent Mufi Hanneman, and Democrat David Ige will each discuss their positions on issues facing Hawaii and explain why they're the best candidate to lead our state for the next 4 years. I'm Daryl Huff. Ahui ho. I'm really sorry about